In a quiet suburb, a mother was pouring juice when her son said something that would change everything. He told her they had to leave before his father came back. But this wasn't just fear. What began as a child's warning uncovered a hidden plan, a sealed house, and a truth no one expected. This is the story of how a mother escaped, just in time. Before we begin, tell us where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds as Sophie poured cereal into a bowl. The spoon clicked gently against the porcelain as she set it down in front of Noah. He sat quietly, staring into the bowl as if he had no appetite. That wasn't like him. Usually, he would ask for extra strawberries or make up a story about being a space captain at breakfast. But today, he didn't say anything. Sophie reached for her coffee, still groggy from a night of restless sleep. Adam had stayed up late in his study again, on one of his long work calls. Or at least, that's what he said. Adam walked in, fully dressed, pulling his suitcase behind him. He looked sharp in his fitted blazer, freshly shaved, as if he had been planning this trip for weeks. But Sophie only found out about it last night. He mentioned it casually, like it wasn't a big deal. Just a few days. Just meetings. Nothing special. He gave Noah a brief pat on the head and said he'd bring back something fun. He smiled at Sophie, but she could tell it didn't reach his eyes. He always smiled like that when others were around. It was the same smile he used at charity dinners and client lunches. Sophie had seen the real version only a few times lately. After a short goodbye, he left, closing the front door behind him with a solid thud. Sophie looked at Noah, expecting him to return to his usual cheerful self now that breakfast was over. But instead, he just kept sitting there. She noticed how he held his spoon without moving. His eyes were fixed on the window, but it wasn't the morning view that caught his attention. Sophie asked if he was feeling sick. Noah shook his head. Then, very quietly, he said something strange. He didn't think Dad was really going on a trip. He said there was something wrong. Sophie didn't understand at first. She asked what he meant, but Noah just looked away. He stood up and walked to the living room window, pulling the curtain aside slightly. His shoulders looked tense, and his small frame seemed heavier than usual, like something invisible was weighing him down. Sophie followed him, asking again if something had happened. He whispered that he had a bad dream last night. A very bad one. It wasn't just about monsters or shadows. In the dream, he said someone tried to take her away. Sophie felt her heart sink. She crouched down to meet his eyes. She tried to tell him that dreams weren't real, that maybe it was because of the scary story they read last week. But Noah insisted. He said it wasn't like a normal dream. It was a warning. He said they had to leave the house. Sophie gently smiled and told him everything was fine. That Dad would be back in a few days and they could spend the weekend watching cartoons or going to the park. But Noah didn't smile back. Instead, he asked her if she remembered the time they went into the basement together to fix the heater. He asked if she remembered the small door in the wall. Sophie blinked, caught off guard. She didn't remember any door. The basement was mostly just storage and old furniture. Noah said he saw it in the dream. The same door. He said it was a place Grandpa used to hide things. Sophie's father had lived with them until he passed away last year. He used to spend hours in that basement reading and writing. Sophie hadn't touched most of his things down there since the funeral. She told Noah not to worry and that maybe they could look around the basement later to show him there was nothing strange. But the unease in her stomach didn't go away. The way he said it, with that calm seriousness, didn't sound like a normal child's imagination. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Sophie cleaned the kitchen, sorted through emails, and tried to focus on her editing project. But her eyes kept drifting to the window. Every small sound outside made her flinch. The garbage truck, a barking dog, even the mailman's footsteps sounded too loud, too sharp. Noah spent most of the time in the living room with his coloring book, but he didn't color much. In the afternoon, Sophie decided to check the basement. Not because she believed anything was down there, but because she wanted to put Noah's mind at ease. She asked him to stay upstairs and went down alone. The basement smelled like old wood and dust. Her father's books were still stacked neatly on the shelves. His armchair remained in the corner, exactly where he left it. A few boxes of Christmas decorations sat near the furnace. She walked around slowly, looking for anything unusual. Then she noticed a wall that looked slightly different. The wood panels didn't match perfectly. She pushed against them. Nothing moved. But when she leaned in and ran her hand across the grain, she felt a tiny bump, like a seam. Curious, she grabbed a flashlight and tapped the edges. One of the boards creaked slightly. She pressed again. Nothing happened. She made a mental note to look at the house plans later. Maybe there was something her father mentioned that she forgot. Back upstairs, Noah was waiting quietly. He didn't ask what she found. He just looked at her face and nodded like he already knew. Later that evening, she received a message from Adam. He said he arrived safely and would be busy for most of the trip. Sophie replied briefly. Her mind was elsewhere. Noah was already in bed by then, hugging his stuffed bear tightly, eyes wide open in the dark. Sophie lay awake in bed, her thoughts circling around the dream, the strange door, and the look in her son's eyes. She remembered her father once said that children see the world in ways adults have forgotten. Back then, she thought he was just being poetic. Now, lying in the dark house with only the hum of the refrigerator and Noah's soft breathing in the next room, she wasn't so sure. The next morning, Sophie sat at the kitchen table with the house blueprint spread in front of her. It was one of the few things she had kept from her father's belongings. The paper was yellowed and slightly torn at the edges. Some of the writing had faded. She traced her finger along the floor plan, focusing on the basement. The diagram showed a solid wall where the shelves currently stood, but just beside it, barely noticeable, there was a faint outline. A square space marked with a symbol she didn't recognize. No door. Just a box in the corner of the page. She looked up at the ceiling. The same quiet creaks echoed above her as Noah got ready for school. She folded the paper and placed it back in the drawer. She told herself it was probably just a storage alcove that was sealed over time. Older houses often had strange corners and forgotten crawl spaces. Noah came downstairs dressed, but still quiet. He didn't ask for pancakes or cartoons. He just stood by the door, clutching his backpack. Sophie helped him put on his coat and asked if he wanted her to walk him to the bus. He nodded. As they stepped outside, a cold breeze brushed against her cheeks. She zipped up her jacket and held his hand. The bus pulled up on time. Noah climbed the steps slowly and turned back to look at her. His eyes met hers for a long second. He didn't wave. The door closed and the bus drove off down the road. Sophie stood there for a while, watching it disappear around the corner. Back inside, she made another cup of coffee and sat down at her laptop. Work emails blinked across the screen, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. There was a car parked across the street that she hadn't seen before. A dark blue sedan with tinted windows. It didn't belong to any of the neighbors. She waited to see if someone would get out, but no one did. After a while, she stood up and drew the curtain. She told herself it was nothing. Just someone visiting a neighbor. Still, the unease wouldn't go away. She decided to return to the basement. Downstairs, the light bulb flickered when she pulled the chain. She pushed the heavy bookshelf aside slowly, inch by inch. Dust rose in the air. Behind it was the panel she noticed the day before. This time, she brought a small toolkit. She slipped a flat screwdriver into the crack and pushed gently. The wood shifted slightly. A thin sliver of light crept in from the other side. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She pulled harder. A section of the panel gave way with a low groan. Behind it was a narrow gap. It didn't look like a full room, just a space between the inner and outer walls. The flashlight beam lit up cobwebs, old beams, and a wooden step leading down. She crouched and peered inside. There was something unsettling about it. Like the air inside hadn't moved in decades. She didn't go further. She replaced the panel and pushed the shelf back into place, heart racing. Upstairs, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Just a single word, careful. She stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. That afternoon, she picked up Noah from school instead of letting him take the bus. He seemed relieved to see her. On the walk home, she asked about his day. He talked about a math quiz and a new drawing he made. But then he went quiet again. At home, he showed her the picture. It was made with crayon. A house with smoke coming out of the windows. A woman and child standing outside, holding hands. In the sky above them was a man's face with no mouth. Sophie asked if it was just a story he made up. He shook his head. He said it was the same house from his dream. The one with the hidden door. The one they had to use. Sophie hugged him tightly. His little arms wrapped around her, and she felt how tense his body was. He asked if they could sleep in her room again that night. She said yes. Later, after dinner, she checked the locks on all the windows and doors. She pulled the blinds down and turned on the porch light. The blue car was gone, but the feeling hadn't left her. She opened Adam's office door. He usually kept it locked, but in his hurry to leave, he must have forgotten. The room was clean, everything in its place. His desk drawer was locked. She tried a few keys from the kitchen drawer, but none of them worked. She sat down in his chair and noticed a small photo frame tucked behind the monitor. It was a picture of Adam, smiling with two men she didn't recognize. One of them wore a dark jacket. Sophie stared at the photo. Something about the man's eyes felt familiar. She thought back to the blue car. She left the office door open and returned to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water and stared at the back door. In the hallway, Noah was standing silently. He asked her if the door was still hidden. Sophie nodded. He said they might need it soon. Before bed, she pulled out her father's journal again. She had flipped through it many times after his passing, but tonight she looked with new eyes. Near the back, she found a folded paper. A letter addressed to her. It wasn't long, just a few lines. He wrote that he never fully trusted Adam. He had seen things, heard conversations that made him uneasy. He warned her to look closely at what was left behind, especially if anything ever felt wrong. And at the bottom, he had underlined something. The house remembers. And Noah sees more than most. Sophie closed the journal and looked toward her son's room. The door was cracked open. She could see the soft glow of his nightlight and the shape of his stuffed animals arranged neatly on the bed. She walked over, opened the door quietly, and found him already asleep. She stood there for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. Then she returned to her room, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark. Her eyes remained open. The letter, the blueprint, the door behind the shelf, the car, the message on her phone. All separate pieces. But something was coming, and Noah seemed to know it first. Rain began to fall just after midnight. Sophie woke to the sound of soft tapping on the window. She checked the clock, 3:17 a.m. The room was dark except for the faint light of the street lamp outside. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Noah, who had crawled into her bed again after dinner. He lay curled under the blanket, his hand still clutching the corner of his pillow. Sophie slipped out of bed and walked toward the window. She parted the curtain just slightly and looked out. The neighborhood was still. No movement. But a dark vehicle was parked near the edge of the cul-de-sac. It was too far to make out the model, but it wasn't familiar. She hadn't seen that car before, and it hadn't been there during the day. Its windows were fogged from the inside. She let the curtain fall and stepped back. Her heart was beating faster now. She walked down the hallway to check the locks again. All were secure. The porch light had gone out. She flipped the switch a few times, but it didn't turn back on. She didn't want to wake Noah, so she returned to the bedroom and lay beside him again. But she didn't sleep. By morning, the car was gone. Sophie waited until Noah was dressed before asking if he had seen or heard anything in the night. He shook his head and started to draw again at the kitchen table. Sophie noticed that the new drawing showed their house from the outside, but this time there was a figure standing near the back fence. Just a shadowy figure with no face, holding something that looked like a phone. She didn't say anything. She folded the drawing and placed it in her bag. Later that day, she opened Adam's office again. The drawer remained locked. She went back to the kitchen, opened the box where she kept old keys, and tried several until one finally clicked. Inside were papers, folders, and an old phone. The phone was turned off. She charged it quietly, watching the screen light up. There was no password. Most of the apps had been deleted, but one folder remained hidden deep in the settings. It was filled with short, coded messages. Sophie didn't recognize the numbers or names, but one message, sent 2 days ago, had a photo attached. She opened it. It was their house, the front window, and inside the frame, her silhouette standing in the living room. The timestamp was from yesterday afternoon. She dropped the phone. Her hand shook as she picked it back up and read the rest of the message thread. There were exchanges about timing and her schedule. One message simply said, "Soon. He leaves in the morning. Everything ready." Sophie couldn't breathe for a moment. She placed the phone in a drawer, locked it, and walked away. That night, she called the number from the text message she received earlier. It rang once and went to voicemail. No name, just static. She didn't leave a message. The next morning, she kept Noah home from school. She told him it was a quiet day and they could do some drawing together. But her mind wasn't on the paper or the crayons. She kept glancing at the front window. A new car had parked farther down the street. Not the same as before. This one was silver with tinted back windows. Noah stayed quiet most of the morning. Then he asked if the bad people were coming today. Sophie paused before answering. She asked him how he knew. He didn't explain. He said he just felt it. Like when you know it's going to rain, even if the sky is clear. Sophie looked through the window again. The silver car didn't move. She told Noah they'd take a walk around the block just to get fresh air. He agreed, but he kept glancing over his shoulder. As they walked down the sidewalk, Sophie noticed a man standing near the entrance of the park. He wasn't watching the kids or walking a dog. He was facing the direction of their house. She looked away quickly, took Noah's hand, and turned down a different street. They walked in silence until they reached the corner store. Sophie pretended to browse snacks while checking her reflection in the window. No one had followed them. Back home, the silver car was gone. Sophie took a deep breath and decided it was time to act. She picked up her father's journal and returned to the basement. The shelf was lighter now, easier to move. She opened the panel again and pointed the flashlight inside. This time, she stepped through. The space was narrow and smelled of dust and mold. A few old boxes lined the wall, covered in cobwebs. In one of them, she found a small leather pouch. Inside were her father's old keys and an envelope. It was unsealed, addressed to her in his handwriting. The letter inside was brief. He wrote that he had once caught Adam in the basement, going through his things, pretending to be helping with repairs. He warned her not to trust too easily. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "If you're reading this, you're already in the middle of something. Don't wait until it's too late." Sophie folded the letter and placed it in her coat pocket. That evening, as she was preparing dinner, the porch light flickered on for the first time in days. The bulb had not been replaced. She froze. She looked through the peephole. No one was there. But the porch felt colder, somehow. She turned the lock, stepped back, and told Noah to stay in the kitchen. She picked up her phone and tried calling Adam. It rang and rang. No answer. She sent him a message asking where he was. It remained unread. When she returned to the kitchen, Noah was staring at the back door. He asked if it was still locked. Sophie nodded. He whispered that he dreamed about the house again. This time, it was on fire. And someone was outside, watching, but not helping. Sophie didn't respond. She didn't want to tell him about the messages or the photos. But the feeling that something was deeply wrong had taken root in her chest. And it was growing stronger with each passing hour. The house felt different now. Not unsafe in the usual sense, but watched. As if every step she took was being counted by someone waiting for the right moment. And Noah, her sweet and quiet boy, had been the first to sense it. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky stayed gray. The house felt colder than usual, as if something in the walls had shifted overnight. Sophie made toast, though neither she nor Noah ate much. He sat quietly at the kitchen table again, drawing in his notebook. His head was down, his pencil moving slowly across the page. When she peeked over, she saw a picture of 3 figures standing outside their house. 2 had red marks over them. The third was smaller, holding something that looked like a key. She didn't ask what it meant. Instead, she decided to open another one of her father's old boxes from the basement. Most of them had sat untouched since the funeral. She carried a small one up to her room. Inside were loose papers, a broken pen, and a set of postcards. All were written in the same careful handwriting. Some were addressed to Sophie, others to no one. They were filled with thoughts her father never said aloud. Some talked about her childhood. Others talked about fears, how he never fully accepted Adam, how he worried Sophie had chosen someone too cold, too careful. He never told her this while alive. But the tone of his writing was honest, almost urgent. At the bottom of one postcard, he had written, "If I'm gone and you feel unsure, trust your instinct. And if Noah ever says he's afraid, believe him." Sophie folded the card and placed it on her desk. She sat still for a long time. The house was quiet except for the soft tick of the hallway clock. Her hands rested on her knees. Her mind wandered to the man she married. The man who used to leave flowers by the bed, who once wrote long messages in her birthday cards. That man had slowly disappeared. Somewhere along the way, the warmth had gone, replaced by a kind of quiet calculation. Later that day, while cleaning Adam's side of the closet, Sophie found a folder tucked between 2 jackets. She opened it, expecting old receipts or work notes. But inside were travel documents, flight bookings under different names, hotel reservations across several states, photos of passports, some real, some clearly fake. One of the names listed was unfamiliar, but the picture attached was Adam's. She stared at the papers without moving. Then she placed them back and sat on the bed. Noah appeared at the doorway. He said nothing, just looked at her face. She nodded slowly and asked if he wanted to take a walk. He agreed, grabbing his jacket without question. Outside, the air was crisp. Leaves stuck to the sidewalk and puddles lined the edges of the road. Sophie walked slowly, holding Noah's hand. She tried to stay close to other homes, glancing over her shoulder every few minutes. They passed the park, but didn't stop. At the corner of the block, Noah tugged her hand and pointed. Across the street stood the same man from the other day, the one in the dark jacket. He wasn't watching them directly, but he was there, unmoving. Sophie turned around. They walked home quickly, cutting through backyards. Inside, she locked every door and drew every curtain. Her heart raced. Noah sat on the sofa, breathing heavily but saying nothing. That evening, Sophie received a call from Adam's assistant. The woman sounded confused. She asked if Adam had made it to Chicago. Sophie's hand froze. She asked what the assistant meant. The woman said Adam's meeting had been canceled 2 days ago. He was supposed to reschedule, but no one had heard from him. Sophie thanked her and hung up without another word. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the creaks in the house, each one sounding louder than the last. Noah lay beside her again, his breathing slow and steady. But she knew he wasn't asleep. His hand gripped her sleeve the entire time. Around midnight, she checked the backyard again. A small movement caught her eye. Near the shed, the gate was open. It had been closed earlier. She walked downstairs and opened her father's journal once more. In the back pages, she found something strange. A sketch of the basement. But it wasn't the regular layout. It showed an outline of a room behind the sealed wall, marked with a single word, watch. She flipped through more pages. Her father had written about hearing noises in the basement during the last months of his life. He thought it was animals, but now she wondered if it had been something else. Someone else. Noah came down the stairs quietly and sat beside her. He asked if they could go see the door again. Sophie didn't argue. They went to the basement together, carrying a flashlight and an old key from her father's box. She moved the shelf and opened the hidden panel. The narrow opening was darker than before. The flashlight beam didn't go far. Noah said he heard whispers in his dream. He said Grandpa told him to take the flashlight and keep walking, even if it got cold. Sophie hesitated, then followed Noah inside. They didn't go far. Just a few feet. But Sophie noticed something she hadn't seen before. A second panel at the far end, low to the ground. A small knob stuck out. She pulled it gently. It opened into another tight space, this one lined with thick boards and blankets, almost like a hiding spot. Inside was a box. Wooden, locked with a rusted latch. She didn't open it right away. They returned upstairs. In the kitchen, she placed the box on the table. Noah watched her, but didn't speak. She used the old key and slowly turned the lock. It opened with a sharp click. Inside were several envelopes. Some were addressed to her. Others had no name. She opened the top one. It was a life insurance document. Her name listed. Adam as the beneficiary. Recently dated. The next envelope held a copy of her mother's will, altered. In the corner was a note in her father's handwriting. He tried to change this. Found it in my study drawer. Didn't confront him. Sophie's breath shook. The final envelope held a photograph. Adam, standing in front of the shed, holding a phone, looking straight at the house. She put everything down and looked at Noah. He didn't ask what was inside. He just said he thought something was going to happen soon. And she believed him. The following morning was quieter than usual. No birds, no wind, not even the soft hum of passing cars. The silence outside made the house feel heavier, as if something was pressing down on its roof. Sophie stood in the kitchen, watching the coffee drip slowly into the pot. She hadn't spoken yet. She hadn't touched her phone. She hadn't even turned on the lights. Noah sat on the sofa, still in his pajamas, hugging his knees. He didn't ask for breakfast. He didn't mention the box they had opened. He just stared out the window, his eyes fixed on the empty road. Sophie didn't have the strength to ask what he saw. When the coffee finished, she poured a cup but didn't drink it. Her phone buzzed on the table. One message. It was from an unknown number again. It said, "Do not run." She locked the phone and pushed it aside. Then she walked to Adam's office, unlocked the desk drawer again, and took out the hidden phone. She checked the message history. The most recent message said, "Leaving today. Have the house ready." The timestamp was from last night. She walked back into the kitchen, sat down, and placed both phones on the table. Her own. His secret one. She stared at them side by side, as if they could explain something just by being near each other. Later, as she did the dishes, she glanced out the kitchen window. The silver car had returned. Parked just beyond the line of hedges. The engine was off. No one stepped out. But she saw a shape in the front seat. A still figure holding something near the face. Possibly a phone. Possibly watching. She didn't open the curtain again. Instead, she turned on the lights in the hallway and walked to the security panel near the front door. It was blinking red. an alert symbol she hadn't noticed before. She tried entering the reset code Adam had shown her years ago. Nothing changed. She tried another combination. Still red. She pulled the user manual from the drawer below. As she flipped through the pages, she realized something strange. The system had been upgraded recently. A new model. Different commands. Different control settings. She had never approved a change. Noah appeared in the hallway and asked if the system was broken. She told him she wasn't sure. He looked at the blinking panel and said softly that the house felt like it was holding its breath. That afternoon, the smoke alarm beeped once. Just a single chirp. Sophie checked every room. No smoke. No heat. Batteries were new. But something in the air felt sharp, almost metallic. She opened the windows briefly and then closed them again. By evening, her phone buzzed once more. It was a calendar notification. An event added to her schedule. She never added it. Meeting with Adam, 8 p.m., house. She stared at the screen. The time was only 2 hours away. She didn't call him. She didn't message back. Instead, she went upstairs, packed a small bag with clothes for Noah, grabbed a file of documents, and took out cash from the safe box hidden in the closet wall. She moved slowly, not to alarm Noah, who was now watching a cartoon with the volume low. As she returned downstairs, the lights flickered for just a second. The porch light came on again, then went off, then back on, like a slow, quiet signal. Noah turned to look at her. She said they were going to leave the house for a little while, just to be safe. He didn't argue. When she tried the front door, the lock didn't budge. She twisted harder. Nothing. She tried the back door. Same result. The windows were the same. Locked tight. Too tight. Not the usual click of resistance. These felt sealed. She picked up her phone to call the police. No signal. She walked to the security panel again. The light had turned from red to solid blue. A hum began in the walls. Low. Distant. Mechanical. Then the lights in the house dimmed slightly, and a soft clunk echoed from behind the walls. A second later, she heard something drop outside, metal on concrete. She ran to the living room window and pulled the curtain. Heavy metal shutters were sliding down over the glass. Slowly, with mechanical precision. She ran to the kitchen. Same thing. Metal panels sealing over the windows. Noah was on his feet now, eyes wide, clinging to his backpack. Sophie's voice was calm, but only on the surface. She told him to get his shoes. He didn't ask why. As the shutters finished sealing the house, the air grew still again. Sophie checked the back door one more time. Nothing. Completely locked. She tried the garage door, but it didn't respond. She looked at Noah. His voice was barely a whisper when he said, "We have to go under." She grabbed the flashlight, their bag, and took his hand. Together, they moved to the basement. The shelf was already slightly open from the day before. She pushed it aside fully and crawled through the narrow gap, guiding Noah ahead of her. The air inside was colder than usual. She clicked on the flashlight and aimed it ahead. The same path. The same walls. But this time, they didn't stop. Noah pointed toward the narrow turn near the second wall. Behind the crates and old blankets was the door they had seen earlier. A wooden one, worn smooth, with rusted hinges. Noah said this was where they had to go. Sophie opened the door. Beyond it, a narrow passage stretched downward. It smelled of old air and damp stone. She crouched low and told Noah to stay close. He nodded once and walked ahead slowly. They moved in silence, the only sound being their soft steps against the dirt floor. Behind them, the house was quiet again. But now it wasn't just a home. It was a trap. The passage grew tighter as they moved forward. The air was damp, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Sophie held the flashlight in one hand and the small bag in the other. Noah stayed close, his small steps careful and steady. The light caught cobwebs along the beams, and small bits of dirt fell from the ceiling as they walked. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but it felt safer than the noise above. After several minutes, the path leveled out. Sophie noticed a narrow turn ahead. When they reached it, the passage opened slightly into a small underground chamber. It looked like it had been dug out long ago. The floor was covered in dust and old rags, and on the far side, there was a wooden ladder leading up to what looked like a trapdoor in the ceiling. Sophie approached it and tested the ladder. It creaked but held. She handed the flashlight to Noah, climbed slowly, and pushed against the wooden door above. It didn't move. She pushed again, harder this time. Something clicked. Then the door shifted slightly. A small beam of morning light cut through the space. She pushed the trapdoor open and peeked through. They were in the floor of the old shed at the back of the garden. Sophie climbed up first, then reached down for Noah. They stood inside the shed, surrounded by gardening tools and dusty shelves. She carefully pushed the trapdoor closed again and looked through the crack in the door. The backyard was empty, but the house looked different now. Cold, sealed, quiet. The shutters covered every window. A large van sat near the back gate, half hidden by the fence. Sophie didn't recognize it. They didn't wait. She took Noah's hand and slipped out of the shed, staying low as they moved along the edge of the garden. She unlatched the back gate and guided him through. They crossed into the neighbor's yard and moved quickly along the path. Sophie didn't stop to check her phone. She didn't call anyone. Her only thought was to get to someone who would believe her. By the time they reached the street, Sophie realized they couldn't go back. She picked up her pace and led Noah toward the edge of the neighborhood. There was a small strip mall not far from there. A few shops. A pharmacy. A gas station. She spotted a phone booth and stepped inside. She called her sister. Melanie answered on the second ring. Sophie didn't explain much. She just asked if she could come. Melanie didn't hesitate. She gave an address and told Sophie to get there quickly. It took them over an hour, walking along quieter streets, avoiding intersections, watching every passing car. The wind had picked up by then. Noah's hoodie flapped slightly as he walked, but he never let go of her hand. When they finally reached Melanie's apartment building, Sophie rang the buzzer twice. The door opened before she could press it a third time. Melanie stood at the top of the stairs, her expression tense. She hadn't seen Sophie in months, maybe longer. But she opened her arms and pulled them both inside without a word. Upstairs, Sophie placed the bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the couch. Noah curled up next to her. Melanie brought them water and a blanket. She didn't ask questions right away. She waited. Finally, Sophie explained everything. The sealed doors. The phone messages. The photo. The secret phones. The drawing. The hidden tunnel. All of it. Melanie listened without interrupting. When Sophie finished, she sat back and looked at her for a long time. She said she always had a feeling something was wrong. That Adam had a way of looking at people that felt rehearsed. That she had once seen him following Sophie's father into the garage and had thought it was nothing. But now it didn't seem like nothing. Sophie showed her the documents she had taken from Adam's drawer. The insurance papers. The fake travel records. The letter from her father. Melanie's face changed as she read them. She didn't speak. Just nodded slowly. She offered to call the police. Sophie hesitated. She wasn't sure what to say. She had no proof Adam had planned anything yet. Just signs. Just feelings. But the sealed house. The messages. The photos. That wasn't a coincidence. Melanie picked up her own phone and made the call. They spoke to a dispatcher. Sophie gave her name, explained that she believed her home had been tampered with. She didn't go into detail. Just said she and her son no longer felt safe there and needed someone to check on the property. The dispatcher said an officer would drive by and file a report. It might take some time. After the call, Sophie sat beside Noah again. He was awake but quiet. He asked if they would go back home. Sophie said not yet. She didn't tell him that she wasn't sure if they ever would. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. The blanket was warm. The couch was soft. But her thoughts kept circling back to the locked windows, the sealed doors, the man in the van, and the cold air of the house. Everything that used to feel safe had changed. And Noah had seen it first. He had known. Without evidence. Without reason. He had simply known. And she had believed him. Just in time. Sophie woke just after sunrise. The apartment was quiet, and the air smelled faintly of toast. Melanie was already in the kitchen. Noah was still asleep, curled under the same blanket on the couch. His face looked peaceful for the first time in days. Sophie sat up slowly, her body sore from tension and lack of sleep. She walked to the kitchen, where Melanie handed her a mug of tea without speaking. They stood together for a while, listening to the sounds of the city waking up. Traffic. Distant voices. A delivery truck rumbling past. Sophie glanced out the window. No strange cars. No one watching. For now. Melanie finally broke the silence. She asked what Sophie wanted to do next. Sophie didn't answer right away. She looked down at her tea and said she wasn't sure. She had left the house behind, but the problem wasn't over. Not yet. After breakfast, Sophie checked her phone. 2 missed calls from Adam's number. No voicemail. A text came in as she watched the screen. It said, "We need to talk. Come home." She didn't reply. Later that morning, a knock came at the door. Melanie froze. Sophie stood up and walked over slowly. She checked the peephole. A man in plain clothes stood outside, holding a badge. She opened the door carefully, keeping the chain locked. He introduced himself as Detective Ramos. He said he had been sent to check on the report Sophie filed last night. He asked if he could come in. Sophie looked at Melanie, who nodded. She undid the chain. Detective Ramos stepped inside and sat across from them. He asked for details. Sophie explained everything again, this time more clearly. The sealed windows, the hidden phones, the unfamiliar cars, the insurance documents, the hidden passage in the basement, the photos sent to her. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked if she had any physical evidence. Sophie handed him the documents from the bag. She showed him the letter from her father, the copied files, the photo of Adam standing outside the shed. Ramos looked at each carefully, then asked if anyone else had access to the house's security system. Sophie said Adam handled all of it. Ramos took a few notes. Then he said a team had driven by the property that morning. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. The yard was neat. No signs of damage. No open doors or broken windows. But something had caught their attention. The home's windows were fully covered by metal security shutters. Thick, industrial grade. The kind not typically used in residential houses. They were controlled by a private system installed under a different name, one that didn't match Sophie's. Ramos asked if she had ever seen a technician at the house. Sophie said no. He nodded and closed his notebook. He said that based on what she had shown, they would open an investigation. It would take time, but they'd start with a formal request for the installation company records and Adam's financial history. He advised Sophie not to return to the house without police escort. When he left, Sophie sat down next to Noah again. He had woken during the visit but hadn't spoken. After the detective left, Noah asked if they were going to stay here forever. Sophie told him not forever, just until things were safe again. Later that day, she got a call from Adam's work. A woman named Claire from Human Resources said Adam hadn't shown up to a planned meeting. She asked if everything was all right. Sophie said she wasn't sure. Claire paused, then said Adam had been acting strange lately. Disconnected. He had requested a large payout of unused leave. She wasn't sure if it meant anything, but thought Sophie should know. That evening, Melanie brought out an old laptop she didn't use anymore. Sophie connected it to her backup drive and started searching. Among old files, she found copies of emails between Adam and someone named ES. They were vague, filled with code words and references to plans and timelines. One email said, "Her share is enough to fix everything. We just need the timing to be right." Another said, "Basement plan ready. Windows seals installed. All we need is the absence." Sophie sat back and stared at the screen. Noah climbed up beside her. He didn't ask what the words meant. He looked at the screen for a few seconds and then said, "We can't go back. Not ever." Sophie didn't argue. She copied the files onto a new drive and packed it in her bag. That night, they all stayed in the living room. Melanie set up a small mattress beside the couch. She didn't say much, but she kept checking the locks on the windows and door. The three of them ate soup and watched a quiet show on TV, trying to pretend for a moment that life was normal. When Noah finally drifted to sleep, Sophie sat by the window, watching the street below. Lights from passing cars reflected on the wet pavement. She held the flash drive in her hand, the weight of it small but important. She knew what was coming now. Not just an explanation, but a choice: to keep running, or to stop hiding and bring the truth into the open. The next morning, Sophie woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. It was still early. The light coming through the window was pale and thin. She picked up the phone and saw a new message. It was short. Just 4 words. "You can't hide forever." She stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Down the hall, Melanie was making breakfast. Noah was still asleep, wrapped tightly in his blanket. Sophie stepped into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands felt unsteady. Her mind kept returning to the message. She hadn't responded to any of Adam's calls or texts since they left the house. But he wasn't giving up. After breakfast, Melanie drove them across town. Sophie had decided to take the files and documents directly to the local police department. She didn't want to wait for the investigation to move slowly. She needed someone to see everything, to take it seriously. Melanie parked near the entrance. Sophie told Noah to stay with her in the car. He didn't complain. Inside, she asked to speak with Detective Ramos again. He wasn't available, but another officer took her into a quiet room. She opened her bag and handed over the printed documents, the letters, the drive, and the photographs. She explained everything again. How she found the hidden phones. How the messages referred to her absence. How Adam had changed the house's system. She mentioned the sealed windows, the insurance policy, the strange cars, and the feeling of being watched. The officer listened carefully. When Sophie showed the drive, he asked to keep it. He said their cyber unit would examine it. Sophie agreed. When she returned to the car, Noah was sitting in the back, drawing again. This time, the picture was different. It showed a woman standing in front of 2 tall doors. One was open, with light coming through. The other was closed, with a shadow behind it. Sophie didn't ask what it meant. Back at Melanie's apartment, they spent the rest of the day inside. Sophie tried to work, but her mind kept drifting. She kept checking the windows. Each time she heard footsteps outside, her body tensed. At one point, a delivery truck stopped out front. Melanie answered the door and returned with a package addressed to Sophie. It had no return name, no note. Inside was a single photo. An image of Sophie and Noah, taken 2 days ago, sitting on a park bench during their walk. Sophie said nothing. She put the photo back in the envelope and placed it under her mattress. That evening, Detective Ramos called. His voice was quiet but firm. He said the contents of the drive revealed more than expected. There were dozens of deleted emails between Adam and a contact using an untraceable address. Most of the messages discussed financial issues, Sophie's inheritance, and plans for removal. They also found a contract for private security installation at Sophie's house, paid for in cash under a fake name. Ramos said a search warrant had been approved. Officers would be entering the home the next morning. Sophie thanked him and hung up. She didn't feel relief, just a quiet sense of waiting. That night, she sat on the floor next to Noah's mattress. He was drawing again. A small house with one window open and smoke rising in the distance. She asked him if he was scared. He shook his head. Then he said that sometimes things had to fall apart before they made sense. She didn't know where he learned to say things like that. Later, while Melanie slept on the couch, Sophie sat by the window again. The sky outside was dark. Few cars passed. A single street lamp flickered at the corner. She thought about the day she met Adam. How different everything had seemed. Back then, he was careful with his words, kind with his gestures. He made her feel chosen, safe. But somewhere along the way, that changed. And she hadn't noticed until it was almost too late. She looked at Noah, sleeping soundly now. She thought of the way he had kept calm when everything fell apart. The way he trusted his instincts. The way he knew something was wrong before anyone else did. She reached into her bag and pulled out her father's last letter again. The ink was faded now, but the words stayed clear. Listen closely, and when the time comes, act. Sophie folded it slowly and placed it back. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow when the officers entered the house. But something would begin, and she was finally ready to face it. The morning came without noise. No knocks, no calls, just quiet light pressing through the windows. Sophie had barely slept. She sat on the edge of the bed with her coat already on. Noah was still under the blanket, his face calm, unaware of the day waiting outside. Melanie stood near the door, holding her keys. Her face said everything: concern, support, caution. Neither of them needed to speak. They drove in silence to the police station. Detective Ramos was already there, waiting near the entrance. He greeted them with a small nod, then led Sophie into a back office. Melanie stayed in the hallway with Noah. Ramos placed a file on the table. He said the officers had entered the house early that morning. The shutters had been triggered remotely just before arrival, but the team bypassed the controls. Once inside, they found signs of forced modifications. The doors and windows had been sealed with remote locks tied to a private network. The system was unusual, something designed for commercial spaces, not family homes. In the basement, they found the entrance to the hidden passage. Officers followed it to the trapdoor under the shed. Everything Sophie described was there. Dust, cobwebs, blankets, old crates. But more than that, they found something unexpected. Ramos slid a photo across the table. It showed a small black box mounted to a beam in the tunnel wall. A camera, hidden, pointed toward the trapdoor. Sophie didn't speak. Ramos said they had taken it in for analysis. Early data showed it had been activated recently. Someone had been watching that passage. More files followed. Ramos laid out copies of bank records and private contracts. Adam had been pulling money from shared accounts slowly, transferring it into hidden ones under other names. He had paid for the security upgrades in full, in cash. He had also reached out to someone with a criminal background, former security, now unlicensed. The same man who had been seen outside their house. He was now being questioned. Sophie asked if Adam had been found. Ramos nodded slowly. He said Adam had been located the night before at a motel on the edge of the city. When officers arrived, he was packing a small suitcase filled with cash, 2 fake IDs, and a burner phone. He didn't resist arrest. But he didn't say much either. Inside his car, they found photos. Of Sophie, of Noah, of the house from multiple angles, and one of the shed. Ramos said the charges were still being prepared, but they would include attempted fraud, illegal surveillance, tampering with residential security systems, and conspiracy. Possibly more, depending on what else they found. Sophie listened without moving. After a pause, Ramos said one more thing. They found a document in Adam's suitcase. A signed insurance claim form with Sophie's forged signature. Dated 3 weeks ago. Sophie felt her breath slow. She hadn't thought about that part for days, though it had always been there, hanging in the back of her mind. Now it sat on paper. Ramos asked if she needed anything. She said no. Just time. When she walked back into the hallway, Noah was drawing again in a small notebook Melanie had given him. He stood up when he saw her. She didn't say anything. She just pulled him into a quiet hug. They left the station together, stepping into the cold morning. Cars passed. People moved. Life continued. But for Sophie, something had shifted. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. Something like clarity. Back at Melanie's apartment, Sophie sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope she had sealed days before. Inside were copies of every important document she had collected. She laid them out neatly and took photos, sending them to her lawyer. She wanted everything official now. Later in the day, Ramos called again. He said Adam had finally spoken. Not much, but enough. He admitted to contacting a man for help, though he claimed it was just for protection. He said he didn't trust Sophie anymore. That she was acting strange. That he thought she might hurt herself. He claimed the camera in the tunnel was a safety measure. That the forged signature was a misunderstanding. Sophie knew better. When the call ended, she sat quietly for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and deleted every message Adam had ever sent her. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Sophie walked out onto the balcony. The air was cold, but steady. The sky above was clear, a few stars blinking behind the city haze. She leaned on the railing and let the silence settle around her. The noise in her head had faded. The panic, the doubt, it had all been replaced with something stronger. A stillness that didn't come from safety, but from knowing the worst had passed. She looked back toward the living room where Noah slept. She knew things would never return to what they were. But now, they could finally begin again. 6 weeks passed. The trial had not begun, but the charges were confirmed. Adam remained in custody. More evidence surfaced almost daily. Bank transfers, private calls, messages to the man hired to watch the house. The camera footage from the passage was recovered. Most of it showed darkness, but a few short clips captured movement. 2 small figures passing through in silence. A mother and her son. Sophie didn't ask to see the recordings. She and Noah moved into a small apartment near the bay. The space was quiet, with wide windows that opened to the sea. The building was older, but warm. Sophie chose it because it was far from the house, far from the neighborhood, far from everything that reminded her of what they had escaped. Each morning, they ate breakfast together near the window. Noah liked watching the birds move between rooftops. He had started school again, this time in a new district. He didn't talk much about the past. He had new pencils, a new backpack, and a new group of classmates who didn't know anything about what happened. He liked that. Sophie found work editing for a local arts magazine. The hours were light, and she could do most of it from home. Melanie still visited often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to talk. She never said she was checking on them, but Sophie knew she was. She appreciated it anyway. One afternoon, Noah came home with a certificate from school, a small award for a writing assignment. Sophie read it at the kitchen table while he changed out of his shoes. The story was short, about a locked house and a narrow tunnel. The main character was a child who knew things before anyone else. Sophie didn't say anything. She folded the paper gently and placed it in the drawer next to her passport. That night, they sat by the fireplace. It was electric, but it made the room feel warmer. Noah lay on the rug with his drawing pad. Sophie sat nearby, sipping tea. He turned and asked what would happen to Adam. Sophie thought for a moment before answering. She said the truth was being handled now. That what mattered was that they were safe. Noah nodded and went back to drawing. He didn't ask if Adam would come back. Sophie spent quiet evenings sorting through the last of her father's things. She had brought only one box with her. Inside were letters, old notebooks, a watch, and a faded photo of the two of them at a park. She found another folded sheet tucked behind a book cover. It was a sketch of the house, her childhood home. The same tunnel. The same door. Her father had drawn it years before. At the bottom, in his handwriting, were the words, "If she ever needs it, it's there." She ran her fingers over the ink, wondering if he had somehow known this day would come. One weekend, Melanie invited them to a small coastal cabin she had rented. It wasn't far, just a few hours along the coast. The air was colder there, and the beach was narrow, lined with pale stones and seaweed. They made a fire, cooked simple meals, and walked along the shore. Noah collected shells. Sophie stood with her feet in the water, letting the waves wash over her boots. She didn't think of the old house. She didn't think of the sealed windows or the sound of metal dropping into place. She only thought about now. That night, before bed, Noah handed her another drawing. This one was different. It showed a woman standing with a child, and above them, a large figure made of light watching from the sky. She asked who the figure was. He said it was Grandpa. She smiled and placed the drawing beside her pillow. In the spring, Sophie filed a petition to remove Adam from any legal claim to her estate. It passed without objection. The documents were mailed in a plain envelope, and she didn't feel much when she opened it. Just a slow breath. A quiet release. One morning in April, as the sun rose earlier than usual, Noah came to her room and asked if they could go for a walk. She made coffee, bundled them both in jackets, and they walked down to the waterfront. The sky was clear. The air smelled like salt. They didn't speak for a while. Eventually, Noah said he was glad they left. Sophie said she was too. He looked at her and asked if they had a real family now. She told him that family isn't about who's there at the start. It's about who stays through everything else. Noah thought about it, then said maybe it was better this way. Maybe the storm had come so they could find the right place to grow again. Sophie didn't say anything. She just held his hand. The wind picked up, tugging gently at their sleeves. And together, they kept walking. If you loved the story, like this video and subscribe.